The microphone was still in my son's hand when I realized I had disappeared from his life. "Richard," Ethan said proudly from the McGill University graduation stage, "you showed me what it means to have a father who truly invests in my future." The audience erupted in applause. Richard Hale smiled beside my son like he had built every dream Ethan ever had. I sat there in the crowd, listening to strangers celebrate a man who had never paid the tuition bills, never stayed awake worrying about deadlines, and never created the $150,000 trust fund waiting for Ethan after graduation. My son thanked his professors. He thanked his mother. He thanked Richard. But he never said my name. Not once. And after 22 years of sacrificing everything for him, I did something nobody expected. I stood up. I walked out. And I decided I would never beg my own son to see me again. What I did not know was that months later, the future Richard claimed he built for Ethan would begin collapsing. And when the truth finally came out, my son would discover exactly who had been protecting him all along. My name is David Bennett. I was 47 years old when I watched my only son graduate from McGill University. To everyone else in that room, it was a celebration. A proud father's dream. A moment when a child's hard work finally paid off. But for me, it became the moment I realized something I had been refusing to accept for years. My son no longer saw me as the person who helped him get there. I had spent most of Ethan's life trying to give him opportunities I never had. After his mother Laura and I separated, I became the parent who handled the responsibilities nobody noticed. I paid the bills. I helped with applications. I worked extra hours when expenses increased. I made sure Ethan never had to wonder whether his future was secure. When he started university, I created a $150,000 trust fund in his name. I told myself he did not need to know every sacrifice behind it. I was not doing those things for recognition. I was doing them because I was his father. But somewhere along the way, Richard Hale entered our lives. Richard was confident, successful, the kind of person who could walk into a room and immediately make everyone believe he belonged there. And slowly, without me realizing it, Richard became the person Ethan looked up to. At first, I told myself that was okay. A child could have more than one person who cared about him. But then graduation day arrived. And standing in that hall, watching my son praise another man for building his future, I felt something break. I did not confront Ethan. I did not ruin his moment. I simply left. Because for the first time, I stopped asking myself what more I could do to prove I loved my son. Instead, I started asking a question I never thought I would have to ask. Why did Ethan believe someone else had built the future I spent my life creating? And months later, I would finally discover the answer when I received a message telling me the trust fund I created for my son was gone. The day after Ethan's graduation, I kept checking my phone. I told myself he was probably exhausted. Graduation ceremonies were long. There were family photos, celebrations, and messages from friends. I was not expecting a dramatic apology. I was not expecting Ethan to suddenly understand everything. I just wanted my son to call. To say something simple. "Dad, I know you were there for me." But my phone stayed silent. Instead, the first message I received from Ethan was short. "I hope you find peace. Richard has always been the person who believed in me." I read that sentence several times. Not because I did not understand the words. Because I could not understand how my own son had reached that conclusion. For years, I had watched Ethan struggle. I remembered filling out his university applications with him at the kitchen table. I remembered driving across the city after a 12-hour workday because he forgot important documents for an interview. I remembered the nights he sat beside me saying he was afraid he would fail. Every time Ethan doubted himself, I reminded him that he was capable. I never needed him to call me a hero. I only wanted him to know I was there. A week later, Ethan came to my house. The moment he walked through the door, I knew he was not there to apologize. He stood near the entrance with his arms crossed. "Dad, we need to talk." I nodded. "About graduation." He looked away. "About why you walked out." I stared at him. "You thanked everyone who helped you accept me." Ethan sighed. "Because Richard was there in ways you were." The words landed harder than I expected. I leaned forward. "What exactly did Richard do?" Ethan immediately answered. "He helped me believe in myself. He prepared me for interviews. He taught me how to handle money." Money. That word caught my attention. Because I knew exactly what Ethan had. And I knew exactly who had made sure he had it. I asked him about the trust fund. His expression changed. "What about it?" "I want to know why Richard was involved with paperwork connected to my account." Ethan became defensive. "Because Richard helped me organize things. You always had rules about everything." I looked at my son. Not the little boy I used to drive to school. The young man standing in front of me, repeating someone else's words. Then Ethan said something that made my stomach tighten. "Dad, Richard says you think money is the only way you can prove you love me." I did not answer. Because suddenly, I was no longer just dealing with my son choosing another father figure. I was wondering who had been teaching him to see me differently. After Ethan left, I opened the trust account records. I expected to find normal paperwork. Instead, I found something I had never approved. A transfer request made weeks before graduation. And attached to the document was Richard Hale's name. 3 months after graduation, I walked into a networking event where Ethan was being celebrated as the newest success story among his former classmates. He had accepted a position at a prestigious company. A $120,000 job straight out of university. Everyone around him was impressed. And standing beside him was Richard. Richard looked exactly how he always looked in public. Confident. Relaxed. Completely in control. I watched him shake hands with people and tell them about Ethan's achievements. "He worked hard," Richard said with a proud smile, "but he needed someone to push him in the right direction." I stopped walking. That sentence was not about Ethan. It was about Richard, wanting everyone in that room to know who deserved the credit. I approached them. "Interesting," I said. "I didn't realize you were the reason he got this far." The conversation around us slowed. Richard turned toward me with a calm smile. "David, this isn't the place." But that was exactly the problem. Richard had chosen every place where the story benefited him. Graduation. Family gatherings. Now this event. He always presented himself as the man who built Ethan's future. And I was becoming the person who looked bitter for questioning it. Ethan stepped between us. "Dad, can you stop doing this?" I looked at him. "Doing what?" "Making everything about what you paid for." The people nearby went quiet. For years, I had avoided telling Ethan how much I sacrificed because I never wanted him to feel like he owed me. But now, the one thing I had never used against him was being turned into a reason to dismiss me. Richard placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Let's not let this ruin your night." I looked at Richard. Something about his reaction bothered me. He was not angry. He was too calm. Like he already knew exactly how this conversation would end. Then Ethan's phone rang. He glanced at the screen. His smile disappeared. "What is it?" Richard asked. Ethan stepped away and answered. A few seconds later, his face changed. The confidence was gone. "The company wants to meet with me tomorrow," he said. I watched Richard carefully. For the first time, he did not look like someone who had all the answers. He looked worried. "What happened?" Ethan asked him. Richard quickly replied, "It's probably just a misunderstanding." But I noticed something. He did not ask what the company wanted. He already seemed to know. Before I left, Ethan followed me outside. "Dad, please don't make this worse." I looked at him. "If Richard truly built everything you believe he built, then you won't have anything to worry about." The next morning, Ethan received the meeting details. And when I saw who was copied on the email, I realized this problem was much bigger than a delayed job. Because the company had contacted me too. The meeting room was silent when I walked in. Ethan sat across from me, looking confused and nervous. Richard was not there. That alone told me something had changed. For months, Richard had been the person with all the answers. The mentor. The advisor. The man Ethan believed had prepared him for success. But when Ethan needed him most, Richard was nowhere to be found. A company representative placed a folder on the table. "We need to discuss concerns regarding your hearing process," she said. Ethan looked confused. "What concerns?" She opened the file. "There are inconsistencies connected to the information provided during your recommendation process." Ethan looked at me, then back at the documents. The company explained that some of the claims Richard made about his role in preparing Ethan and connecting him with opportunities could not be verified. The position was being suspended. The $120,000 job Ethan had celebrated after graduation was gone before his first day. Ethan sat back in disbelief. But Richard told me everything was confirmed. Nobody answered. Because everyone in that room knew the same thing. Richard had created confidence around a future he did not actually secure. After the meeting, Ethan called Richard immediately. I listened as my son's voice changed from confusion to frustration. "Why didn't you tell me there were problems?" A pause. Then Ethan's expression hardened. Richard was blaming the company. Then he was blaming the situation. Then, finally, he blamed me. "He thinks I'm against you," Ethan said into the phone. I watched him listen. For the first time, Ethan did not automatically accept Richard's explanation. When the call ended, he looked at me. "Dad." He hesitated. Then he asked the question neither of us wanted to ask. "What happened to the trust fund?" I said nothing, because I already knew that question mattered. Richard had convinced Ethan that my financial planning was restrictive. That he knew better. That he could grow the money faster. Ethan contacted Richard and demanded the records. Richard immediately tried to stop him. "Ethan, you don't understand these investments." That was the first time Ethan heard fear in Richard's voice. Not confidence. Not certainty. Fear. A week later, we sat with a financial lawyer reviewing every document connected to the trust. The records showed withdrawals, transfers, accounts connected to Richard's own financial network. But there was still one document missing. The lawyer opened the final file. He looked at the signature page. Then he slowly turned the document toward us. I looked down. And there it was. Richard Hale's signature. The proof we had been searching for. The document on the table changed everything. For months, Ethan believed Richard had been the person protecting his future. The man who encouraged him. The man who guided him. The man who supposedly invested in him when I did not. But the truth was sitting right in front of us. Richard had convinced Ethan that the trust fund I created was holding him back. He told him my approach was too cautious, too restrictive. He made Ethan believe that accepting Richard's advice meant taking control of his own future. But Richard was never protecting that future. He was using it. The lawyer explained that Richard had moved the trust money into investments connected to his own financial network. Investments that carried risks Ethan never knew about. Investments Richard had no right to control. The $150,000 I had saved over years of work was no longer the safety net I created for my son. It had become part of Richard's attempt to prove he was the person who knew best. Ethan sat quietly as every document was explained. He looked at the paperwork, then at me. "Dad." His voice was different. Not defensive. Not angry. Just uncertain. "I thought you were trying to control me." I looked at my son. The same son who had once called me whenever he needed advice. The same son I had watched grow up. "I was trying to protect you," I said. Ethan lowered his head. Because for the first time, he understood the difference. I never needed credit for paying bills. I never needed applause for creating the trust. I never needed him to tell everyone what I had done. I only needed him to know that every sacrifice came from love. Richard, meanwhile, could no longer hide behind his image. The company reviewed the information connected to Ethan's job recommendation. They discovered Richard had exaggerated his involvement and provided misleading claims about the opportunities he helped create. The reputation he built as the man who made Ethan successful disappeared. People who once admired him started asking questions. But the biggest loss for Richard was not financial. It was Ethan's trust. Ethan confronted him privately. "I believed everything you told me about my father," Ethan said. Richard tried to explain. He said he was only trying to help. He said he had good intentions. But Ethan no longer saw the confident mentor from graduation day. He saw someone who had taken credit for sacrifices he never made. Someone who had risked his future while pretending to protect it. Ethan walked away. Not because he stopped caring. Because he finally understood who had been honest with him. Rebuilding my relationship with Ethan did not happen overnight. There were no magical words that erased months of distance. There were difficult conversations. There were apologies. There were moments where silence said more than words could. One evening, Ethan sat across from me and said something I had waited years to hear. "I should have thanked you." I looked at him. "You don't owe me a speech, Ethan." He shook his head. "No, I do." And for the first time, my son was not repeating someone else's version of our story. He was seeing it clearly. I told him forgiveness was possible. But trust had to be rebuilt one decision at a time. After everything that happened, I stopped chasing recognition from people who refused to see my sacrifices. I focused on my own life, my own peace, and the people who valued me without needing proof. The day I walked out of Ethan's graduation felt like the day I lost my son. But looking back, it was the day I stopped losing myself trying to convince someone of my worth. Because sometimes walking away is not abandoning someone. Sometimes it is the only thing that allows them to finally understand what they walked away from. And after 22 years of proving I was his father, I finally learned I never needed to prove it at all.